My husband and I are starting over, Vanessa Mercer announced into the open microphone, champagne glass raised, voice carrying across every table in the Alderton Club's grand dining room. And I'd like to thank the woman who made that possible. She turned and looked directly at Serena Whitfield. Not at the chair where Serena had been sitting, not at the general vicinity of Serena's table. At Serena. With the specific, deliberate eye contact of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her bathroom mirror and was now performing it for an audience of 300 people who had paid $1,200 a plate to be there. Serena Whitfield did not move. She held her wine glass at exactly the height it had been at when Vanessa started speaking. Her spine did not change its angle. Her expression did not shift by a single degree. And Vanessa Mercer, who had spent the last 8 months becoming the kind of woman who publicly humiliated a sitting board member at a charity dinner for children's literacy, smiled, the smile of someone who believed she had already won. She was the only person in that room who believed that. If you've ever been written off by someone who had no idea what they were writing off, stay with me. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know how far this reaches. And if you haven't subscribed to Crimson Secrets yet, do it now, because this story is just getting started. Serena Whitfield had known about the affair for 93 days. She had not found out the way people expected women in her position to find out. There was no late-night phone she'd scrolled through in a parking lot, no hotel receipt left in a jacket pocket, no lipstick on a collar in the literal, almost comedic sense that those things happened in other people's marriages. She had found out the way she found out most things that mattered, by paying attention. It started with a question her husband, Colton, asked at dinner one evening in September. Not the question itself, the way he asked it. They had been talking about the annual fundraiser for the Alderton Children's Literacy Foundation, the event Serena had chaired for 6 years, the event her family's name had been attached to since her mother co-founded it in 1987. Colton had asked carefully, almost too carefully, whether a woman named Vanessa Mercer might be appropriate to include on the planning committee. Colton did not ordinarily have opinions about the planning committee. Serena had said she would think about it. She had watched his face when she said it, the slight recalibration of his expression, the casual nod that was working too hard to be casual. She had thought about it for approximately 36 hours, during which time she made 2 phone calls, one to a woman named Frances who had known Colton since business school, and one to a contact at the commercial real estate firm where Vanessa Mercer worked as a director of acquisitions. She learned what she needed to know in under 48 hours. Then she sat with it. That was the thing people never understood about Serena Whitfield, the thing that made them consistently underestimate rooms and social rooms, and apparently in her own marriage. She did not react. She observed. She catalogued. She waited with the particular patience of a woman who had grown up, watching her father, Edmund Whitfield, dismantle situations that other men would have detonated with noise and emotion. Her father had built the Whitfield Group from a regional accounting firm into a financial management institution. With offices in 7 cities, he had done it quietly. He had done it by understanding that power did not announce itself. It simply arrived when the moment was exactly right, and by then the situation was already decided. Serena was 51 years old. She had spent 30 of those years learning from Edmund Whitfield. She knew how to wait. The morning after she confirmed what she already knew, she called her brother, Philip. Philip Whitfield was 3 years younger and had inherited their father's legal instincts, combined with their mother's ability to read the architecture of a room. In under 60 seconds, he was a senior partner of a firm that handled, among other things, the legal infrastructure of the Whitfield Group. He picked up on the first ring. "I know," was the first thing he said. "How long?" she asked. "Frances called me last week. I was waiting for you." A pause. "She's been angling for a board seat," Philip said. "The Literacy Foundation. She's been using Colton to position herself." Serena looked out the window of her home office at the garden her mother had planted, and she had maintained for 22 years. "I know. V, how do you want to handle this?" "Slowly," she said. "Not yet." Philip was quiet for a moment. He was one of the few people in her life who understood that not yet from Serena was not avoidance. It was preparation. The foundation gala is in 6 weeks, he said. I know. Another pause. I'll have Harrison look at the Whitfield Group's exposure in the construction projects Colton has been co-developing. The ones with outside partners. Don't do anything yet, she said. Let me see how far he takes it. Serena. Philip. Her voice was even. I'll know when. She heard him exhale slowly on the other end of the line. Then, okay, but just so you know, Dad already knows. That stopped her for exactly 1 second. You told him? He figured it out himself. You know how he is. He said to tell you he's available when you're ready. Edmund Whitfield, 81 years old, still read the Wall Street Journal before 6 in the morning and still understood the financial structure of every significant project that carried the Whitfield name. He had said he was available. That sentence, delivered through Philip, contained an entire conversation Serena did not need to have out loud to understand. Tell him I'll call on Sunday, she said. He'll be waiting. She put the phone down. She went back to her desk. She had a board presentation in 2 hours and a lunch meeting with the foundation's executive director after that, and she handled both of them with the focused precision of a woman who had not spent the morning learning something that had the capacity to dismantle the last 20 years of her life, because she hadn't let it. Not yet. Not on Colton's timeline. On hers. The night of the Alderton Children's Literacy Foundation annual gala arrived the way those evenings always arrived for Serena, with preparation that looked like ease and required an enormous amount of invisible infrastructure. She dressed at 7. A deep burgundy gown she had selected 10 days earlier, not for beauty, though it accomplished that, but for the specific message it sent in a room where messages were sent through fabric and posture, and the precise choice of which jewelry to wear. Her mother's pearl earrings. Nothing else. Her assistant, a composed young woman named Bethany, appeared in the doorway at 7:45. Car is confirmed. The Alderton table is set. Your name placard is center-facing, as requested. A beat. Vanessa Mercer is on the guest list. She came in under the Langford Development corporate sponsorship block. Serena met Bethany's eyes in the vanity mirror. Langford Development was Colton's most significant outside business partner. Leave it, Serena said. Bethany gave one precise nod. She had worked for Serena for 4 years. She knew what leave it meant. Colton appeared from the adjoining room at 55, looking well assembled, in the way he always did at events like this one. Silver, cufflinks, dark suit, the air of a man who understood that appearance was a form of argument. He was 54 years old, and he still had the particular confidence of someone who believed his own narrative, without examining it too closely. You look beautiful, he said. He probably meant it. That was the complicated part. Colton had the ability to mean small things while lying about everything else. And Serena had spent years understanding that those two facts, without canceling each other. Thank you, she said. Ready? The car ride was 19 minutes. They made the conversation that people made when they had stopped saying real things to each other. The guest list. The table arrangements. The foundation's new program director, who Serena wanted to spotlight in the remarks. Colton mentioned he had some people he needed to connect with. Serena looked out the window and thought about Sunday's call with her father. The Alderton Club's main dining room was everything it was designed to be: high ceilings, candlelight, the particular hum of 300 people performing their best versions of themselves for one another. Serena moved through it the way she always moved through rooms like this, not commanding attention, not deflecting it, simply occupying her presence with a certainty that made space without demanding it. They had been seated for perhaps 25 minutes when she felt it. Not saw, felt. The way the room adjusted at the edges, a slight reorientation of gazes, the specific quality of collective awareness that arrived when someone entered who was not quite expected, and had constructed that entrance very deliberately. Serena turned her head at a measured pace. Vanessa Mercer was 31 years old, and she was wearing a dress the color of winter wheat. And she was moving through the dining room with the deliberate ease of a woman who had decided in advance that this room belonged to her. She was striking in the way that people were striking when they had assembled that quality with a great deal of intention. dark hair, sharp collarbone, the kind of smile that read as warmth from a distance and as calculation up close. Colton had gone very still. Serena felt it before she looked at him. The sudden absolute tension in his body, the arrested motion of a man whose performance of normalcy had just been interrupted by the arrival of a complication he had either arranged or failed to prevent. She did not turn to look at his face. She kept her eyes on Vanessa and watched the private language move between them across 30 feet of candlelit dining room in under 4 seconds. Then Vanessa began to move toward their table. Serena picked up her water glass. Vanessa stopped at the edge of their table. She extended her hand to Serena with the precision of a woman who had decided how this interaction would go and was performing the decided version. "Mrs. Whitfield, I don't think we've formally met." "Vanessa Mercer. I've been working with Colton on the Langford mixed-use project." The table had gone quiet. Serena set her glass down with exactly the deliberateness the moment required. She looked at Vanessa's extended hand. She looked at Vanessa's face. She took the hand, shook it once, and released it with a composure so complete that 2 people at the adjacent table would later describe it separately as almost frightening. "How interesting," Serena said. "Colton's never mentioned you." 4 words, delivered at the volume of ordinary conversation, landing with the weight of something much larger. Vanessa held her smile. "Well, I imagine Colton has a full plate." She glanced at him, a quick, proprietary glance that she did not fully trouble herself to disguise. Then she moved to a nearby table, accepted a drink, and settled in with the practiced self-possession of a woman who had decided the evening was already hers. The dinner progressed. The Foundation's executive director gave remarks about the year's impact numbers. A video played showing children in after-school reading programs, heads bent over paperback books. The specific expression of a kid who had just discovered that reading could take you somewhere. Serena watched all of it. She applauded at the correct moments. She engaged with the couple to her left, old friends of her parents, with the focused warmth she brought to people she genuinely liked. Colton left the table twice in 40 minutes. He returned from the second absence with his expression slightly too composed, the face of a man managing something he believed was invisible. She said nothing. She lifted her wine. She watched the clock that no one else in the room could see. Her friend Margaret, not Margaret from the name list, but her friend of 20 years who had been her college roommate and who was constitutionally incapable of pretending not to notice things, leaned toward her under the cover of reaching for the bread. "Serena, very quiet. That woman is sitting at an angle to Colton that is not accidental." "I know," Serena said. "How long?" "Long enough." Margaret looked at her with the careful attention of a woman trying to determine whether her friend needed alarm or reassurance. Whatever she found on Serena's face settled the question, because she leaned back, picked up her own wine, and said nothing further. At 9:38, Colton stood up. He didn't signal his intention. He simply rose, and because he was Colton Whitfield, because his name was on the Gala's presenting sponsor list, because he occupied the particular social weight that certain successful men occupied in rooms like this one, people noticed. Then they quieted. He smiled his public smile, the one built for rooms rather than people. "I just want to say something," he began, his voice carrying easily across the tables. "Tonight's about new chapters." He paused for exactly the right duration. "About having the clarity to understand what matters and the courage to act on it, even when that means making changes that are long overdue." The room was receiving this with the polite attention that rooms gave to remarks from significant donors. Then Colton's eyes moved, briefly, but not briefly enough. They moved toward Vanessa Mercer's table with the specific pull of a man whose self-control was wearing thin in ways he hadn't noticed yet. "I think that kind of honesty," he continued, "is something to celebrate." He sat. The room was quiet in the way. Rooms were quiet when they had understood something they weren't supposed to understand yet. Not applause quiet, held breath quiet. Serena sat with her hands in her lap, her posture unchanged, her expression the particular neutral of a woman oriented toward a destination that the rest of the room could not yet see, because she had built it, and she knew exactly where it led. Then, from across the dining room, a chair moved. Vanessa Mercer stood up. She was holding her champagne glass. She was smiling with the full, unguarded confidence of a woman who had decided this was her moment and was going to inhabit it completely. "And I'd like to add to that," she said, her voice warm and carrying, "because I think Colton is right." She raised her glass higher. "To new chapters, to the people brave enough to write them." A pause, deliberate and performed. "To Colton." She let his name sit in the middle of all that candlelight like something placed on a table with great care. Then she turned. She looked directly at Serena Whitfield. And she smiled the smile of a woman who believed she had just won something. "And to the future," Vanessa said, "wherever it leads." She drank. No one else raised a glass, no echo, no answering murmur from the crowd, no ripple of validation moving through the room. 300 people in a room full of candlelight and inherited crystal, and the only thing moving was the ghost of Vanessa's voice, dissipating into a silence that was, in its totality, one of the most complete silences Serena had experienced in a room of that size. Vanessa's smile held for 5 seconds. Then something moved through it. Not panic, not yet, but the first thin fracture of uncertainty. The recognition that the room had not received her the way she had expected. Serena rose. She didn't rise dramatically. She didn't rise quickly. She rose with the particular unhurried inevitability of a woman for whom the next action was simply the next thing that was going to happen, and no force in the room had the capacity to alter that. She set her napkin on the table. She smoothed the front of her gown. Burgundy, her mother's pearls, chosen 10 days ago for exactly this night. And then she walked toward the center of the room, not toward Vanessa, not away from Colton, simply toward the center, with the measured certainty of a woman who knew what was arriving, because she had sent for it herself. Every eye in the room followed her. From beyond the dining room's double doors, she heard it before she saw it. The particular rhythm of multiple sets of footsteps moving with the purposeful, unhurried pace of people who had decided exactly where they were going. The doors opened. Edmund Whitfield walked into the Alderton Club's dining room, and the room understood. In the way that rooms understood things when certainty of a certain magnitude entered them, that what they were witnessing had already decided. He was 81 years old, and he moved like a man of 60, and he had the specific gravity of someone who had spent 5 decades being the most considered presence in every room he entered. Behind him, Philip Whitfield, contained, precise, with the look of a man who had already reviewed every relevant document and found them, Satisfac stepped into the candlelight and let his gaze move once, comprehensively across the dining room. Colton saw them and went the color of old paper. Serena, standing in the center of the room, did not turn. She didn't need to. She could see it in Colton's face. The precise moment when the petitments of what he had done, and what he had failed to understand about the woman he had done it to, arrived all at once, and without any of the softening that advance notice might have provided. He had thought he was leaving a marriage. He had not understood that he was moving against a structure that had been built over 50 years by people who had never once lost a fight they decided to win, not because they were cruel, because they were patient, and because they understood, in a way Colton Whitfield had apparently never fully absorbed, that the Whitfield name on the foundation's letterhead was not ceremonial. Edmund crossed the room without appearing to hurry. He reached his daughter. He took her hand briefly in both of his and looked at her face with the careful, unhurried attention of a father, reading the things his child would not say out loud. "We're here," he said. "Right on time," she said. Edmund Whitfield did not raise his voice. He never had. He crossed toward Colton's table with the specific, unhurried purpose of a man who had never in his adult life needed to raise his voice to make himself understood. He stopped 4 feet from where Colton sat, and he looked at him. Not with anger, with the particular detached clarity of a man assessing a situation that was already resolved. "Colton," he said. "Just the name. The way you said the name of something you had already decided to remove from an equation." Colton's throat moved. "Edmund." His voice was controlled in the way that voices became controlled when their owners were running very fast internal calculations. This isn't. Tonight is for the foundation," Edmund said quietly. "We'll talk soon." That was all. No raised voice, no accusation. No performance. And somehow it was the most devastating thing that had happened in that dining room all evening. Philip moved next. He walked within range of Vanessa's table with the easy, unhurried composure of a man who had spent 20 years arguing in front of judges and had long since stopped finding any room. Particularly intimidating, he looked at Vanessa. She looked back at him. She was still standing. That was the thing that several people would note later, that Vanessa Mercer stood for the full duration of the Whitfield family's entrance, her champagne glass lowering incrementally, her smile maintaining its shape the way things maintained their shape, right before they didn't. "I don't believe we've met," Philip said pleasantly. Vanessa opened her mouth. "I know who you are," he said with the mild precision of someone reading a document they had already reviewed. "And I know what you thought was happening tonight." He let a half-second of silence. "You may want to speak with the Langford Development legal team on Monday. There are some structural questions about the co-development agreements that will need to be addressed." His voice was professionally warm. "Enjoy the rest of the evening." He turned away from her with the same ease with which he'd turned toward her, and that was the entirety of Philip Whitfield's engagement with Vanessa Mercer. It was, three people at surrounding tables would agree privately later, the most efficient thing they had witnessed at a social event in years. Vanessa sat down. The woman beside her, a Langford Development colleague who had attended as part of the corporate bloc and was now deeply, visibly reconsidering that decision, shifted her chair approximately 3 inches to the left. Vanessa reached for her champagne glass. It was empty. She set it back down. Across the room, Colton was not looking at her. He was looking at his own hands on the white tablecloth, and then at Edmund, and then at the middle distance of a man running triage on a situation that was not responding to triage. Margaret appeared at Serena's side. She didn't speak immediately. She stood for a moment in the particular way of a close friend who understood that the moment didn't need narration. Then, quietly, "Are you all right?" Serena considered the question with the attention it deserved. "Yes," she said. And then, because it was Margaret, "It's strange. I expected to feel more. What do you feel?" Serena looked at Colton across the room. He was looking back at her now, actually looking at her with an expression she recognized as one she hadn't seen from him in a long time. Not guilt exactly, though that was in it. Something more complicated. The look of a man who was seeing something clearly that he had been choosing not to see, and finding that clarity arriving under these circumstances provided nothing useful. "Finished," she said. "I just feel finished." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she took Serena's arm lightly in the way of old friends. "Come on," she said. "The dessert at the far table is better, and I refuse to watch you stand in the middle of this for another 10 minutes. Serena almost smiled. "Give me a moment," she said. She walked to her father. Edmund turned toward her fully as she approached, not the partial attention of a man managing multiple things, but the whole, focused, unhurried attention he had given her since she was a child, the kind that had always made her feel like the most important thing in whatever room they shared. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We were always coming," he said. "You know that." She looked at him. He looked at her. An entire conversation happened in that silence that no one else in the room had access to. "I wanted to wait until he made it public," she said. "Until there was no ambiguity." Edmund nodded slowly. "You were right to wait." He paused. "Philip has everything ready. The Langford agreements, the co-development structure has provisions that were always contingent on Whitfield Group participation. That participation is under review." He said it the way he said everything consequential, quietly, simply, without drama. "The foundation," she said, "still yours, entirely, and without question." He met her eyes. "Your mother started it. You've run it for 6 years. Whatever happens with Colton has no bearing on the foundation's governance structure. Philip made sure of that 3 years ago." Serena absorbed this. "He didn't know about that clause." "No," Edmund said, "he didn't." She took a breath. Then she turned and looked at the room one last time. At Colton, still at his table, sitting in the particular stillness of a man who understood that the landscape had changed while he wasn't paying attention. At Vanessa Mercer, alone now. Her colleague having apparently remembered a prior commitment. sitting in a champagne-colored dress with her arms close to her body and her face arranged in the careful composure of someone calculating an exit. At the 300 people who had watched something tonight that they would be describing to other people for months, in the careful language of those who understood that what had happened here moved through professional circles in specific and consequential ways. She looked at all of it. She let herself feel it, not with triumph, not with grief, but with the particular clarity of something that had been in motion for a long time and had now finally come to rest. Then she turned to her father and her brother, and she walked with them toward the exit without looking back. Behind her, she heard Colton say her name, Serena. His voice was lower than usual, stripped of the performance it normally carried, genuinely uncertain in a way she hadn't heard from him in years. She kept walking. He said it again. She did not stop, not because she was making a point, not because she was performing an exit, but because she had understood, clearly and for some time now, that there was nothing left to say, and tonight had made that official. Philip held the door. As she passed him, he didn't say anything. He just looked at her with the look that meant, "I'm proud of you and we'll talk tomorrow, and it's already moving," all in one expression. She stepped out into the night air. Behind the closing door, the hum of the room, the reassembled murmur of 300 people returning to their conversations, the clink of glasses, the careful social machinery restarting, faded. Her mother, Harriet, fell into step beside her in the corridor. Serena had not seen her enter, but Harriet Whitfield had a way of being present at the moments that mattered without making an announcement of it. She had been doing it for 51 years. For a while, neither of them spoke. Their heels made quiet sounds on the floor. "How long did you know?" Harriet asked finally. 93 days. Harriet absorbed this. "You said nothing." "I was waiting." For what, specifically, Serena thought about the question, with the attention her mother always drew out of her, about the September dinner and the careful way Colton had asked about the planning committee, about the 93 mornings she had made coffee and watched him move through their kitchen with the specific distraction of a man who was living two things at once, and growing less careful about hiding it, about Philip's voice on the phone saying "we're ready," and her own voice saying "not yet." "I was waiting for him to choose," she said, out loud, in front of people who would understand what it meant. A pause. So there would be no version of this where he could reframe it later. Harriet was quiet for a moment. Then, with the dry, precise delivery that was her particular he certainly made it unambiguous, and Serena, in the corridor outside the Alderton Club's dining room, laughed. Not a performance of a laugh. The real thing, brief and genuine, arriving without warning. Harriet took her arm. They walked. Behind them, Colton Whitfield sat at the table that still held Serena's place, setting across from his. His phone was in his hand. He was staring at it without seeing it. Around him, the gala proceeded with the determined normalcy of a social world that had witnessed something significant and was now processing it collectively, the way those worlds always did, through the careful language of dinner table conversations that would become phone calls, that would become the professional opinion of 300 influential people who had been in the room. At the table beside his, 2 members of the Langford Development Advisory Board were speaking very quietly, their heads angled toward each other in the specific posture of men who had just understood that something they had assumed was stable was considerably less stable than they'd thought. One of them reached for his phone beneath the table. He sent a text to a number he described in his contacts as Langford Wallace. The text said 4 words, "Call me first thing." The reply came back in under 90 seconds. These were the first small movements of something that would accelerate considerably in the days that followed. Vanessa, for her part, sat alone in her champagne dress for 11 more minutes. Before she gathered herself and stood, she walked to the bar. She ordered something that wasn't champagne. She stood there with her back to the room, which was the first genuinely strategic decision she had made all evening. The morning came gray and cold and specific, in the way that mornings came after significant nights. Colton called Philip at 8:15. Philip picked up after 4 rings, which was longer than usual, which was its own kind of answer. "Philip." Colton's voice was controlled. Whatever happened last night, this is family. This doesn't need to go the way you're clearly intending to take it. The Langford co-development agreements have always contained a Whitfield participation clause, Philip said pleasantly. That's in the original documents. You signed them. I drafted them. A pause. This isn't a response to last night. This is a contractual consequence of choices that were made a long time ago, and of a decision last night that made the resolution of those choices unavoidable. A silence. I want to speak to Serena, Colton said. Serena will communicate with you through our legal team, Philip said, which, as of this morning, I am leading directly. Colton hung up. He sat in the kitchen of the house he had lived in for 20 years and thought about the Langford projects, about the co-development timeline, about the financial architecture of his 4 most significant investments, all of which had the Whitfield Group threaded through their structure in ways he had understood as a formality. Until this morning, when the formality had become a wall, he called his attorney. His attorney, to his credit, was honest with him. Colton, the exposure here is significant. The Whitfield participation clauses are not boilerplate. They're structural. If the group withdraws support and calls for a formal review, a pause, the Langford investors are going to ask questions. The questions are going to have answers you don't want them to have right now. How long do I have? His attorney was quiet for a moment that lasted too long. That depends on how fast this moves and based on what you're describing. Another pause. I think you should assume it moves fast. It moved fast. By Wednesday, 2 of the Langford investors had requested calls with the project's structural review team. By Thursday, the Foundation's board had received a formal communication from Edmund Whitfield's office, confirming that the Whitfield family's involvement with the annual gala would be increasing, and that Serena Whitfield had been appointed chair of the Foundation's new endowment committee, with an expanded governance mandate that had nothing to do with Colton and did not require his participation or his name. The same day that communication went out, Vanessa Mercer arrived at her office to find that her keycard didn't work. She pressed it twice, then a third time. Then she turned to the security desk with the specific, careful composure of a woman holding her expression together through an act of will. The security guard, a man named Paul, who had always been perfectly decent to her, looked at her with genuine discomfort. Mrs. Mercer, HR asked me to let you know they'd like to speak with you. They asked that you wait in my card, she said. Yes, ma'am. With my card? Yes, ma'am. If you'd like to wait, can you just call upstairs and confirm it's a systems issue? His voice was kind, immovable. HR has asked you to wait in the lobby. She waited 26 minutes. The HR director came down with a manila envelope and the expression of someone who had done this before and had not found a way to make it comfortable. Your conduct at the Alderton Gala Monday evening was identified as a significant breach of professional standards, the director said. Additionally, concerns have been raised at the board level regarding conduct over the past several months. The severance package in that envelope is more generous than the circumstances required. Vanessa took the envelope. Her hand was steady. Her face was steady. She walked out of the building into the sharp morning and stood on the sidewalk with the envelope in her hand, thinking about a champagne glass and a dining room full of people who had watched her toast the wrong woman. She called Colton. It went to voicemail. She called again 20 minutes later. 2 rings, then voicemail, which meant he had seen her name and made a decision. She put her phone in her bag. She ordered a coffee she didn't drink and sat with the specific clarifying quiet of someone who was understanding, in concrete terms, what had actually happened on Monday night and what it meant for every part of her life that had been, without her fully realizing it, contingent on a situation she had fundamentally misread. Serena spent Wednesday morning at her parents' home, which was where she had gone the night of the gala and where she had slept, surprising herself with the deep, uninterrupted quiet of someone whose body understood that a long tension had finally been released. She was on her second cup of coffee when Philip looked up from his laptop and said, "The Langford Review is accelerating. 2 investors by this afternoon." Edmund lowered his reading glasses and looked at his daughter. "How are you this morning?" he asked. Not as a formality, as a genuine question. Serena looked at her father across the breakfast table. I feel like someone who's been bracing for an impact for 3 months, she said, and finally understands that it already happened and they're still standing. Harriet, refilling her coffee, said without turning around, "You were always going to be standing." Edmund looked at Serena for another long moment. Then he went back to his reading, which from him was as close to "I know you know I'm proud of you" as he typically got without words. On Thursday, Colton called Serena directly. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Victoria," he said, then caught himself. "Serena, I know you have Philip involved and I know what that means. I'm not calling about the Langford agreements. I'm calling because..." He stopped. "Because we were together for 22 years and I can't." Another stop. "Can we talk? Just us, without the legal framing?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, Saturday morning, Whitmore Cafe on Tremont, 10 o'clock, 1 hour. He was quiet. "1 hour, Colton. And I want to be clear before you come. I'm not coming to discuss the marriage. That's done. I'm coming because 22 years deserves one honest conversation." She hung up. She went back to the document on her desk. The proposal she and the Foundation's executive director had been drafting, the one that would rename the endowment after her mother and expand the program's reach by 30%. It was good work. Real work. The kind that outlasted the personal circumstances that had made the space for it. She picked up her pen. Saturday arrived with the particular clear cold of late autumn in the city. The Whitmore Cafe was small and serious, the kind of place chosen for conversations that didn't need an audience. Colton was already there. He stood when she entered, which he had always done. She sat. They ordered coffee. And then the server left, and they looked at each other across a small wooden table in the clear morning light. And Serena had the odd, specific experience of seeing her husband of 22 years, as though with a stranger's clarity, not with hatred, not with grief, but with the particular precision of a woman who had finally stopped negotiating with what she was seeing. "You look tired," she said. "I am." He didn't dress it up. "The Langford Review is accelerating. 2 of the investors have requested exit interviews. The advisory board is asking questions I don't have good answers for." She held her coffee cup. "I know. Was this the plan all along?" He asked it carefully, not with anger, genuinely trying to understand. "The clauses, the structure, was that. The structure existed to protect what my family invested," she said. "It always did. I didn't activate it until you made it necessary." She met his eyes steadily. "You made it very public, Colton. You made it impossible to resolve quietly." "I know." He looked at his hands. "I know I did." A pause. "Why?" She anger, with the genuine curiosity of a woman who had turned the question over for 93 days and had arrived at her own answers, but wanted to hear his. He was quiet for a long time. Someone near the window laughed at something. The ordinary morning continued with its ordinary indifference. "Because I didn't know how to end it, honestly," he said finally. "So I made it so visible you'd end it for me." He looked up. "That's not an excuse. It's just what it was." She heard this. She sat with it. "Did you love her?" A longer pause. "I think I loved the feeling that nothing was expected of me. That's different." He looked at the table. "I don't think that's love." She nodded slowly. She looked at her coffee. "I loved you," she said, "for a long time, genuinely. I want you to know that even now, the past tense landed between them with the weight of something gentle and final and complete." "I know," he said quietly. "I know you did." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the city moved. Inside, the cafe was quiet. "What happens now?" "Philip will be in touch about the legal process. I want it clean and fast. No prolonging, no spectacle." She paused. "The Langford situation, that's yours to manage. I'm not in a position to tell you how that resolves. I think you already know." He nodded. He looked like a man who had known for several days and had been hoping to be wrong. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "After." Something shifted in her expression. Not toward grief, not toward performance, but toward something forward-facing, something with its own quiet energy. "I've been working on a proposal to rename the Foundation's endowment after my mother," she said, "and to expand the literacy program into 3 additional districts. The executive director and I have been building the framework for months." She paused. "It's real. It matters. I'm ready for it. He looked at her face when she said that, the genuine, unperformed energy behind it. And he saw, clearly and too late, the woman who had been sitting inside the composed, managed marriage for 22 years, waiting for enough space to become fully herself. You'll be extraordinary at it, he said. He meant it. She looked at him for a moment. I know, she said, quietly, without arrogance, with the grounded certainty of someone who had finally stopped waiting for permission to believe it. She put on her coat. She stood. Take care of yourself, Colton. She meant that too. She looked at him once more, clearly and without residue, the way you looked at something you had closed, with as much grace as the closing allowed. Then she walked out into the sharp Saturday morning, and the light was clean and pale, and entirely hers. 6 weeks after the gala, on a Tuesday morning, at 9 o'clock, the Alderton Children's Literacy Foundation announced the Harriet Whitfield Endowment for Early Literacy, capitalized at $8 million, and expanding the program's reach to 3 new school districts serving over 4,000 children. The announcement went out under Serena's name alone. Her phone began ringing at 9:03. The first call was Margaret. I'm standing in my kitchen, Margaret said, no preamble, and I'm actually a little emotional about this, which is embarrassing. Please don't be embarrassing, Serena said, but she was smiling, genuinely, without performance. Serena. Margaret's voice was firm in the way of a friend who had known you long enough to refuse to be redirected. You know what you've done. You know what this means for those programs. A pause. How does it feel? Serena was standing at the window of her new office, a space she had signed a lease on 3 weeks ago with her name on the paperwork and no one else's. The foundation's logo on the frosted glass of the door. Her mother's name on the endowment. It feels like something that finally belongs entirely to me, she said. The second call was Philip. The Langford Review concluded this morning, he said. 2 investors have exited. The third is in negotiation. A pause. Colton's team is looking at restructuring options. Okay, she said. A beat. Serena. His voice was different, quieter. Dad wants you to know he read the announcement before 9. He called me. Another beat. He said she sounds exactly like her mother. She looked at the window. The city was bright and moving and indifferent, in the way cities were, and her eyes stung briefly and unexpectedly. Because that was the thing about her father. His love always arrived sideways, and it always landed exactly where it was aimed. 3 weeks later, a business journal ran a feature under the headline, Whitfield Endowment Signals a New Model for Community Literacy Investment. The piece was 1,200 words. It quoted Serena on the foundation's philosophy and expansion criteria. It quoted the executive director on program outcomes. It quoted 2 teachers from the new districts who described, in concrete and specific terms, what access to those resources meant for their classrooms. The piece mentioned Colton, in one sentence in the 8th paragraph, as Serena's estranged husband. She read that paragraph twice. The reduction of 22 years to one sentence in the 8th paragraph of a story about something she had built, felt, she found, not like loss, like proportion. Like the story finally getting its own scale right. She sent the piece to the executive director with a single line. This is what we're doing. The reply came back in 4 minutes, and we're just starting. The divorce was finalized on a gray morning in November. Philip handled the process as promised. Clean, professional, fast, because both of them had decided their own separate reasons that prolonging it served nothing. Serena signed the final documents in Philip's office at 10 in the morning. When she set the pen down after the last signature, Philip looked at her across the desk with the expression he reserved for the few things that moved him genuinely. Done, he said. Done, she agreed. He came around the desk and put his arms around his sister, briefly, in the way of siblings who knew each other well enough to say the things that didn't have words. She let herself be held for exactly that moment. Then she stepped back. She straightened her jacket. Thank you, she said, for all of it. Since the beginning. Always, he said. She walked out, down to the street, and stood on the sidewalk in the gray November morning, and felt the specific quality of something completed. Not the dramatic finish of the gala. Not the held breath in the arriving footsteps. Just the quiet administrative close of something that had ended, in every real sense, weeks before she called her mother. Harriet picked up on the second ring. "It's done," Serena said, a pause. When Harriet spoke, her voice had something in it that Serena rarely heard, the sound of the woman underneath the composure, before all the years of careful management, something soft. "Good," Harriet said. "How do you feel?" Serena thought about it, honestly, standing on a sidewalk in November, with the city moving in every direction. "Free," she said. "I feel free." They stayed on the line for a moment without speaking, in the particular, comfortable silence of women who understood each other. "Sunday dinner," Harriet said. "Finally, I'll bring the wine," Serena said. She put the phone away. She started walking toward her office, toward the endowment committee meeting scheduled for 2 o'clock, toward the expansion proposal that needed her signature, toward the 4,000 children in 3 new districts who were waiting, though they didn't know it yet, for someone to decide their reading mattered. She walked toward it with the specific, forward-facing energy of a woman who had closed one chapter completely enough that she could already feel the next one taking shape beneath her feet. Vanessa Mercer, at roughly the same hour, was in her 3rd meeting with a career consultant. She had done what she was told, stayed quiet, stayed off social media, let the story move. The consultant had told her 12 to 18 months if the story faded. She was doing the work of making it fade. She did not call Colton again. She had understood in the sharp clarifying days after the gala that Colton's silence was its own kind of answer, and that some answers, once received, could not be usefully argued with. She applied for a position at a nonprofit, focused on adult literacy in a city 2 states away. She got an interview. She did not think about the Alderton Club dining room more than once a day now, which was progress. She thought about Eleanor Whitmore's, no, Harriet Whitfield's, Philip Whitfield's. She thought about what had been said to her in that room, not to her face, but near her, in her direction, with the mild and absolute clarity of people who understood exactly what they were doing. You mistook borrowed attention for power. She was understanding it more completely now than she had in the moment. In the moment, she had still believed she was in a contest. She understood now that she had never been in a contest. She had walked into a situation whose architecture she had not bothered to learn, because she had been too certain of her own reading of it. And she had made herself the most visible person in the room, at precisely the wrong moment. She was going to spend a long time learning to be less certain. That, too, was something. Serena delivered the keynote at a regional education leadership conference in January. 400 superintendents, principals, curriculum directors, and development officers. In a convention center ballroom with her name on the screen, behind her and the Harriet Whitfield Endowment logo beside it. She stood at the podium without notes. She had written them and set them aside, because notes were for uncertainty, and she was not uncertain about this. She spoke for 30 minutes about investment and patience, and the specific discipline of building something that was meant to last. She spoke about the difference between presence and power, about what it looked like to create something real versus something that depended on conditions that could be withdrawn. She spoke about 4,000 children and what it meant to decide, before they asked, that their education was worth someone's full commitment. She did not mention Colton. She did not mention the gala. She didn't need to. When she finished, the room was quiet for 2 full seconds. Then it rose. Not polite applause. Not the reflexive standing of an audience fulfilling a social contract. The kind of standing that happened when something true had been said in a room full of people who recognized it because they had been carrying versions of it themselves. Serena stood at the podium and let it land. She did not minimize it with a self-deprecating word or a rushed smile. She received it completely because she had earned it, and because she had spent enough of her life making herself smaller than the space she'd been given, that she had decided, firmly and permanently, that she was done with that particular habit. She found her mother in the 3rd row, standing with everyone else with the expressions of a woman who had known this was coming and had arranged to be there to see it. Serena stepped back from the podium. She thought about the Alderton Club, and the burgundy gown, and a champagne glass raised across a candlelit room. She thought about her father's hand taking hers, and the word ready, and what it had meant to have built this moment, quietly, over the 93 days before anyone in that dining room knew what was happening. She thought about the 4,000 children whose names she was still learning, about the 1,200 applications that had already come in for the endowment's first grant cycle. They had projected 300. She thought about what she had told her father at the gala. I was waiting for him to choose out loud. So there would be no ambiguity. There was no ambiguity now. There hadn't been for months. The applause continued. The room was still standing, and Serena Whitfield stood in it, present and forward-facing, and entirely certain, and thought about the toast. Vanessa Mercer had raised a champagne glass in a room of 300 people, and toasted the future with the full confidence of a woman who believed she understood what the future held. She had aimed that toast at a woman she had never truly looked at, not past the surface, not past the composed and elegant exterior, not into the 51 years, and the family, and the patience, and the particular quality of attention that Serena Whitfield had been building her whole life. She had not seen any of it, and what she had triggered that night in the Alderton Club dining room. This endowment, this stage, this room of 400 people. Still standing, this work was not a response to Vanessa Mercer. Not a performance of recovery for Colton's benefit. Not a statement for anyone in any dining room. It was simply Serena Whitfield, finally, completely, and without apology, taking up the space she had always been entitled to occupy. The other woman had toasted her victory. She had done it in front of the wrong woman. And the wrong woman had walked out of that dining room and built something that was already outlasting everything that had broken in that room, and would continue outlasting it for decades, in the form of children who learned to read in schools that had not had the resources to teach them well, and in the names of women who received grants and mentorship and the specific life-altering experience of someone deciding their ambition was worth investing in. Power does not announce itself over a microphone. It does not require a champagne glass or a dining room full of witnesses or the validation of a crowd that wasn't paying attention anyway. It simply builds, quietly and with absolute intention, until what it has built is so undeniable that the question of whether it was ever doubted becomes genuinely uninteresting. That was the lesson the Alderton Club dining room learned the night Vanessa Mercer raised her glass to the future. Serena Whitfield had already been living in it.